Okay, welcome to a lovely collection of notes, once again focusing on AP Lit. This particular section is going to focus on actually looking at how to compose and put together the Q2 for AP English Lit. For those of you that have actually done AP English 3, the next slide and a little bit of the discussion as we start off is going to be focused more towards you. For the rest of you, it's just a good chance to kind of hear what it is that the papers do at this particular level. It will provide you with some information that's going to be equally useful. It's just going to be useful in a different fashion. All right. So AP Lang versus AP Lit Q2s. The AP Lang Q2 is focused on rhetorical analysis. Essentially, you're looking at how the author of the piece selected specific tools and techniques to enact persuasion on the audience, to be able to accomplish their purpose by manipulating the prior base knowledge, the appealing to the knowledge that the audience has had from past experiences, from the group that they're currently with, things of that matter. It's all 100% focused on how those tools, techniques, and devices impact the person that's perceiving the information. Yes, it does kind of focus on the information in and of itself, but there's not these basically living, breathing entities within it. Their writing is nonfiction. There's no main characters within it. It's a situation where it's an address, a speech, a letter to a particular person that's supposed to read it on the other side. And so there's not really a focus so much on what it's doing to the internal workings of itself as compared to what it's doing to the person that's actually a part of the audience. For Lit, we don't really have that same audience structure that Lang has because, number one, our pieces aren't written for one individual. They're meant to be flexible so they can apply to different people in different situations. It allows the piece to breathe, have a new element of life. It allows it to be adaptable to different cultures and situations. A slightly modern and overly simplified example would be the Harry Potter and the Cursed Child play that was put out, that awful thing and all that. Yeah, we won't go there. But whenever it came out, when the stage production was being cast, they cast a black woman as Hermione Granger. There was a big uproar about it, and when J.K. Rowling became aware of it, her simple response is the fact that the character of Hermione Granger really isn't identified by any particular color. So Hermione could have been any color under the sun. That the features that she had could be applicable to a black woman. By doing that, she actually essentially made the piece that much more applicable and have that much more of an appeal to a whole nother group of individuals by offering them the chance to closely associate with one of the main characters. Most authors don't get a chance to do that. The changes that they're going to make, the uniquenesses they're going to make within their piece, it's done and all within the frame of the novel itself, and then they just don't comment. They let whatever people think is happening in it be whatever people think is happening in it. They leave it alone because that interpretation makes things unique. So with them, much like Lang, they use tools and techniques, but they look on how the tools and techniques are going to impact the novel, the characters, the setting, the internal workings of the story itself. It's as if the universe of the story is a living, breathing entity, and those tools and techniques are used to modify, augment, and change those particular beings within that world, and that world in of itself. So it never talks about the appeals like a Q2 does in Lang. It focuses instead on just the impact on the story itself, how it augments, how it changes it. So that's really the key differences between the Lang and the Lit pieces. Let's look at this example. It says, in this excerpt from Thomas Hardy's The Mayor of Casterbridge, 1886, Michael Henchard and his daughter Elizabeth Jane are reunited after years of estrangement. During this separation, Henchard has risen from poor seasonal farm worker to wealthy mayor of a small country town, while Elizabeth has supported herself by waiting on tables at a tavern. Read the passage carefully, paying in particular attention to tone, word choice, and selection of detail. Compose a well-written essay in which you analyze Hardy's portrayal of the complex relationship between the two characters. So, first, let's go ahead and acknowledge the main thing. The first trap people think they're running into is that there's a list of things that you can analyze within this when you're looking at the complex relationship between the two characters. Please note that's not a trap. Those things actually are present within the text and they can be used. But that's not the trap I'm actually referring to really with this question, because when I look at something and I see that it wants us to compare the complex relationships between characters, when it wants us to analyze character relationships, the development of characters, etc., I think one of the easiest tools to be able to access and understand it is tone. In fact, tone is very much the heart of this question. It wants to know how the tone has been shifted, because if characters are at odds with one another, then there should be tone-based words used to suggest the fact that these characters are at odds with one another. Those tone words are going to be mixed in with other tools like imagery, detail, diction to be able to create the modifications, the tweaks, the world in all in which the characters live. So one of the things I want to wholeheartedly encourage you to do is, instead of looking at tone individually, just say in one set of body paragraphs for this particular essay, look at tone throughout the entire piece. Focus on how the tone is representing the relationships between the two characters. And then you basically use tone as the canvas for painting your argument, and the paint that you're going to be using are the other devices and tools. It makes it a little easier to be able to know what it is you're writing with every Q2 when you face it. It makes it easier to figure out how to get started, and it'll make you overall much more successful. Now, at minimum, you have to master writing 6 paragraphs for each of the essays, with only 40 minutes to write total for one essay. Now, the 6 paragraphs includes introduction, conclusion, and then 4 body paragraphs. For those of you that wrote the body paragraphs for AP Lang, especially those of you that worked with me, we wrote these long flowing body paragraphs where we combined 2 examples into it. That was actually done largely because there was an observation made that many papers that were earning high score marks were actually doing that style and structure. The problem is that's not A, very collegiate, and B, I saw a lot of pitfalls over the last couple of years with that structure with some students. Some it worked out fine, but there were way too many where it didn't. So what we're going to do is we're going to have 2 body paragraphs for each of the tools or techniques that we're analyzing. So let's say we're talking about imagery. Imagery is going to have 2 body paragraphs focused on its use within the piece. More on that coming later. But a couple other points about this. We're going to go through the structures as we go through the next couple of slides, and everything's going to seem difficult, especially for those of you that are new to AP. You're just going to have to get used to things. It takes time. Remember, my expectations are for you to do 100% your best as it is right now. What it is right now isn't going to be the same thing as it is in a month or 2. Or in all honesty, even a week. So your introduction is going to be quite simplistic. It's going to start off with a sentence that's going to include the author's first and last name, mention of the title of the work, as well as create a nice thematic idea about the piece that you're studying. For instance, it may be something like John Irving's A Prayer for Owen Meany explores the coming of age of 2 boys in the late 1960s, struggling to find the answers to life's most challenging questions of fate and faith. Now, please note, I used the full name of John Irving here. If I wanted to just go down to one name, I'm going to call him Irving, not John. I won't call him John because that's inappropriate, and it's also very confusing. Using the last name is it's the standard that we follow. It is the established custom, and we're going to follow after it. Next, sentence 2, after you have that nice statement and all about the work itself, then focus on the setting. Set in southern Alabama, the piece focuses on, you wanted to talk about the setting, draw them into where things are taking place. Then you could introduce the major characters, motifs, symbols, any of these things if you want to, but truthfully, you really don't want your introduction to go more than about 3 to 4 sentences in length. You want it to be fairly quick because the person really wants to get on with reading your actual piece itself. The introduction, again, should be brief. Please make certain that up to this point, it doesn't seem like a reader's response. It doesn't seem like a book report. It seems clear that you're moving in a direction and all that's going to eventually lead to your argument. The argument would be your thesis statement. Thesis statements should contain a clear focus. They need to relate to the work as a whole. Yes, we're going to identify unique sections of it within the body paragraphs, but we'll break it down and go into those levels of focus when we get there. For the thesis statement, we want to talk about the work as a whole. It can, but it doesn't have to contain the lit devices you're going to focus on. I think that it's smart to do so. When you're doing standardized testing, you're resting everything on the person on the other end being able to truly know what it is that you've done so they can give you proper credit. Listing the tools and devices as you're going to discuss them is a very wise choice. It gives them a checklist and lets them be able to go, yes, they've identified things they're going to look at. Now let's see how they do. Finally, you do not have to use the lit devices mentioned in the prompt. However, it's not a bad idea because those devices are there. Body paragraphing, it'll start off with a topic sentence. The topic sentence should contain keywords from the thesis. It should have a focused topic, a focused argument that it's going to present, and then from that point forward, it's all about flowing into what's going to be said next. I would like to point out that our body paragraph structure is going to have us having a body paragraph that focuses on how a tool or technique is used early on in the piece towards the introduction of it, and then how that tool or technique is used later on in the piece when there's been a shift in something. Usually when we're talking about a Q2, it's a shift in tone. The tone switched from being something perhaps at an early part of the piece and all they seem very serious or very uncomfortable with one another, and then it shifts to a point of comfort or love or whatever it may be. We need to be working on identifying the shifts in everything that we talk about, because we're going to talk about the shift within the short stories with the Q2. We're going to talk about the shifts within the poems when we get to the Q1, and the shifts within the novels when we get to the Q3. The shifts are really what you're highlighting and accentuating within this. So one body paragraph is going to have a discussion of a tool or technique early in the piece, truly exploring it, dissecting it, really making it poetic and sing. Then the next body paragraph is going to talk about that same tool later on in the piece. Then third body paragraph will be a new device early in the piece, and then the fourth body paragraph will be that next new device towards the end after the shift. By doing that, we're really kind of mapping out and fully exploring the tools and techniques we're looking at, and we're giving everybody what they really want. So body paragraphing, there are a lot of different acronyms people use. APE, APE, Answer, Prove, Explain is one that's used a lot in STAR. I like using AEC, Assertion, Argument, Evidence, Example, and Commentary. Essentially, you start off the paragraph with your topic sentence, and then you're going to transition into your text evidence. It may be something like, in Huck Finn, Mark Twain spends a lot of time developing the character relationship between Huck and Jim, beginning with using detailed imagery to show the nervousness between the two characters. That's a real rudimentary, real rough, because I'm just kind of going flat, but something like that, and then it would transition. The first occasion where we see detailed imagery being used by Twain to highlight the relationship between Huck and Jim is when the character of Huck says, and then we have the quote. We lead into it. There's a lead in. There's a flow that goes from topic sentence to, here we go, this is the first example. Evidence is the quote. Now, don't quote tons and tons and tons and tons and tons. You're not going to want to do that, especially when I tell you the rule of how you have to discuss those things. What you want to do is you want to quote the section that definitely includes the lit devices you're talking about and includes just enough surrounding information that it makes sense, that is sensible and able to be dissected. So you'll quote. And yes, you must quote. You can do some paraphrasing, but they still want to see the quotation marks and a quote from the piece at the same time. Trust me, just do it. Commentary is going to have you then discussing the quotation and how it connects to the argument. That's done by first clearly stating which parts of the quote are actually the tool in use. So if you say it's detailed imagery, pull out the section that's detailed imagery. What words are detailed imagery? Then explain how the tools are functioning. If it's detailed imagery, tell me what senses that plays to and how it plays to them. Paint me that wonderful, amazing picture. Remember the discussion about the warm roasted marshmallows crunchy in your mouth, exploding, gummy, wonderful goodness? That type of stuff, that's a level of detail I want in that follow-up. You tell me what the words are, then you tell me how it plays out. Then tell me how that affects the characters and the setting and the story. That's the author's purpose. The author does this to make certain that he can highlight the complex relationship between that type of structure. So that would be the beginning and then the middle sections of the body paragraph. Including statements at the end of it, restate the topic sentence and either transition to the next example or wrap up the piece entirely. Some body paragraphing tips. Number one, make certain you introduce your quote with that lead-in that I suggested earlier on. Make certain you're choosing the absolute best quotations that do have the devices being used so you can clearly state it while still capturing the essence of when it's being said. Make certain you follow your quote with a commentary that covers all those parts that I mentioned earlier. Make certain it, again, does what it needs to, and then make certain that you have a 1-to-2 ratio at minimum. I'm actually thinking 1-to-3. I'm thinking that you'll have your quotation, then you'll have your, here are the pieces and all the tool. These are the parts of the tool. This is the tool right here. Here are the words. Here's what the tool's doing. Here's how to interpret the tool. Here's how to perceive the tool. Here's how to process the tool. And then here's how it's impacting the overall story. And then, of course, conclusion. If you do that, you'll be at a good ratio, because the rule is every one sentence of quotation needs to have all those sentences of follow-through. If you do that, you're not going to use block quotes because they're not necessary, and you'll be very mindful about the quotes that you do use. More importantly, you'll have a really amazing essay if you're following through on that. 2 body paragraphs, again. One's going to focus on earlier use of the tools, and then the second's going to go later. Initially, Twain uses diction to establish a tense mood between Huck and Jim by... As the text progresses, Twain shifts the mood between Huck and Jim to... Now, to make it to a 7 and 9, the pieces have to be very artistic and poetic. They have to really be full of a lot of expression within it. It's got to be something that's enjoyable and engaging and factual at the same time. Just making certain you have all the pieces in place will get you a 6. Making certain you really make it sing will get you the higher scores. So I'm going to be relentless right up front, right off the bat, but making certain all the pieces are there. If you start putting the polish in early, you start moving up early. But you have to have the pieces first. Here's the general overall outline of the piece. You can feel free to access this at any particular point that you want. I'll make certain there's a paper version of it loaded to the exact same document page as this one inside of Canvas. Finally, for the conclusion of the overall paper, you're going to restate your thesis statement. And then after you do as it says, restate the thesis without actually cutting and pasting, have it have some flexibility. And also please avoid the phrase in conclusion. Use something more akin to, as has been clearly demonstrated through the preceding analysis. It is clear that Mark Twain uses detailed imagery and diction to help provide a clear understanding of the complex relationship between the characters of Huck Finn and Jim in The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Then, the second part of the conclusion is tie it to significance. What does it matter? Why did they write it? What were they trying to talk about? World significance, social significance, personal, political, culture, gender, racial, language. Just pick one.